Many of us pray, asking God to move, to open doors, to change situations. We cry out, Lord, answer me. But here's the challenge. Sometimes God answers and we miss it. Not because God is silent, but because his answer doesn't always look the way we expected. God's answers are not limited to our imagination. We often want a loud voice from heaven, a dramatic miracle, or an instant solution. But God is far more strategic than that. He answers according to his wisdom, his timing, and his purpose. Sometimes God's answer comes through a process, not a moment. You asked for strength, and God allowed pressure. You asked for wisdom, and God gave you responsibility. You asked for direction, and God closed one door so you would notice another. What you thought was a delay may have been divine preparation. Other times, God answers through people. A conversation, a correction, or even a challenge may be the very response you prayed for. But if you're only looking for a supernatural sign, you may overlook the natural tool God is using. We must also understand that no and wait are still answers. God is not ignoring you when he says no. He is protecting you. He is not rejecting you when he says wait. He is aligning you with something greater, recognizing God's answer requires spiritual awareness. It means trusting God even when his response stretches your faith. When you learn to recognize how God speaks and moves, you stop missing miracles that are already in motion. So the question is not just, has God answered? The real question is, am I paying attention to how he answers? When we come to God in prayer, we often come with a picture already formed in our minds of how the answer should arrive. We imagine the timing, the method, and the outcome. We expect God to work within the boundaries of our understanding, but God is not confined by human expectations. His ways are higher, his perspective is eternal, and his responses are shaped by purposes we cannot always see in the moment. Because of this, many people struggle to recognize God's answer simply because it does not match what they were looking for. We tend to equate God's answer with comfort, speed, and clarity. If the answer does not bring immediate relief, if it does not remove the struggle, or if it requires effort on our part, we assume God has not responded. But often, the very thing we are asking God to change is the tool he is using to develop us. What we label as inconvenience or frustration may actually be divine instruction. God is not just interested in fixing situations, he is focused on shaping character. There are times when we ask God for deliverance and instead he gives endurance. We pray for the removal of a burden, but God provides the strength to carry it. In those moments, it is easy to think our prayers went unanswered, when in reality, God answered in a way that produced growth rather than escape. If God always responded by removing difficulty, we would never learn trust, perseverance, or dependence on him. His answer often targets who we are becoming, not just what we are experiencing. Another reason we miss God's answer is because we are looking for something dramatic. We expect a breakthrough that feels extraordinary, yet God frequently works in quiet, ordinary ways. Subtle shift in perspective, a gradual improvement, or a new opportunity that requires effort may not feel like a divine response, but that does not make it any less God ordained. The miracle is not always in the moment. Sometimes it is in the process. God's power is just as present in steady progress as it is in sudden change. Our expectations can also be shaped by comparison. We see how God answers someone else's prayer and assume he will respond to us in the same way. But God deals with individuals personally, not generically. What worked for one person may not work for another because God tailors his answers to each person's calling, maturity, and assignment. When we insist that God must answer us the way he answered someone else, we limit our ability to recognize what he is doing uniquely in our own lives. There are also moments when God's answer initially feels like loss. A door closes, a relationship ends, or a plan falls apart. And instead of seeing it as an answer, we see it as failure. But God often answers by removing what is not aligned with his purpose. He may shut down an option not because it is bad, but because it is not best. If we only define God's answer as addition, we will miss the wisdom behind subtraction. Sometimes God answers by clearing space for something greater. Our expectations are often rooted in immediacy, but God operates with eternity in mind. We want solutions that work now, while God is working toward outcomes that last. An answer that unfolds slowly can be frustrating, especially when we are eager for change. But God's timing is intentional. He knows when we are ready to receive what we are asking for, and He knows when waiting will protect us from harm or pride. What feels like silence may actually be God pacing the answer to match our growth. Recognizing God's answer requires humility. It means accepting that our understanding is limited and that God's wisdom surpasses ours. It calls for trust when the response does not make sense, and faith when the outcome is uncertain. When we release our demand for God to answer in a specific way, we become more open to seeing how He is already at work. God's answer may not look like what we expected, but it will always align with His purpose, His love, and His plan for our lives. Waiting is one of the most difficult experiences in the life of faith because it forces us to confront our lack of control. When we ask God for something and the answer does not come immediately, our natural response is to assume something is wrong. We question whether God heard us, whether we prayed correctly, or whether we did something to disqualify ourselves from receiving what we asked for. But delay is not evidence of absence. God's silence is not the same as God's inaction. While it may feel like nothing is happening, God is often doing His deepest work beneath the surface. Delay tests our trust. It reveals whether our confidence is rooted in God's character or in the speed of His response. Anyone can trust God when answers come quickly, but waiting exposes the strength of our faith. In seasons of delay, God is teaching us to depend on who He is rather than on what He gives. The waiting period becomes a classroom where patience, perseverance, and humility are developed. These qualities cannot be rushed, and God will not skip the process just to satisfy our discomfort. Many people view waiting as wasted time, but in God's economy, waiting is never unproductive. While we are focused on the outcome, God is focused on preparation. He may be aligning circumstances, shaping relationships, or developing skills we will need once the answer arrives. Receiving something too early can be just as harmful as never receiving it at all. God understands the weight of what we are asking for and knows when we are truly ready to carry it. Delay, then, becomes a form of mercy rather than punishment. Waiting also reveals our motives. When the answer is delayed, we are forced to examine why we want what we are asking for. Is it for comfort, recognition, or control, or is it aligned with God's purpose? Delay strips away shallow intentions and refines our desires. Over time, our prayers often change. What we initially asked for may no longer be what we truly want. And that shift is evidence that God is working within us. The delay becomes a tool that brings our hearts into alignment with His will. In delayed seasons, God is often strengthening our endurance. Endurance is not developed in moments of ease, but in prolonged uncertainty. When answers do not come quickly, we learn to remain faithful without immediate reward. This kind of faith matures us and prepares us for greater responsibility. God is not only concerned with blessing us, He is concerned with sustaining us. He wants to ensure that when the answer comes, we have the spiritual capacity to steward it well. Delay also teaches us to listen more closely. When answers are immediate, we may move forward without seeking further guidance. But when God allows us to wait, we are drawn into deeper communication with Him. Prayer becomes less about requests and more about relationship. In the quiet space of waiting, God often reveals insights, corrects direction, and deepens intimacy. What seems like postponement may actually be an invitation to grow closer to Him. There are times when God delays because the environment is not yet ready. Just as a seed planted too early can fail to grow, an answer delivered too soon can be ineffective. God may be working on people, systems, or situations connected to our prayer. What we see as a personal delay may involve factors far beyond our awareness. God's timing accounts for details we cannot see, and his delay ensures that when the answer comes, it will function as intended. Waiting also confronts our tendency to rely on ourselves. When answers are delayed, we are tempted to take matters into our own hands. God often allows delay to teach us restraint and dependence. Acting prematurely can create complications that God never intended for us to manage. Through delay, God teaches us the value of obedience over urgency. He reminds us that his plan does not need our manipulation to succeed. Ultimately, waiting reshapes our perspective. It teaches us that faith is not measured by how quickly prayers are answered, but by how faithfully we trust God in the meantime. Delay does not cancel God's promise. It prepares us for it. When we learn to see waiting as part of the answer, we begin to recognize that God has been at work all along, even when the fulfillment has not yet arrived. God often chooses to answer prayers in ways we do not expect, and one of the most common ways he does this is through people and circumstances. We pray for direction, provision, or guidance, and we expect the answer to appear as a direct intervention from heaven, a voice from the sky, a sudden miracle, or an immediate resolution. But God frequently works through natural means. He uses the people around us, the events we encounter, and even challenges we face to respond to our prayers in ways that require our participation, discernment, and faith. Recognizing these answers requires attentiveness and a willingness to see beyond the obvious. Sometimes the person who brings the answer is someone we least expect. It could be a mentor, a friend, or even someone who challenges us. Their words, advice, or support may carry the very guidance we prayed for, yet if we are only looking for a dramatic or supernatural response, we can miss the significance of what God is doing through human channels. God is capable of speaking through anyone he chooses, and often he uses ordinary people to achieve extraordinary purposes. This teaches us humility and reminds us that God's resources are limitless and his ways are not restricted to what we can imagine. Circumstances can also serve as answers to prayer. A door closing, a delay, or an unexpected challenge may feel discouraging at first, but these situations are often the very mechanisms God uses to redirect us toward his will. What seems like a setback can actually be a setup for something greater. When we face obstacles, God is often guiding us away from something harmful or leading us towards something beneficial. The answer may not be immediate clarity, but a series of events that, when viewed in hindsight, reveal God's hand at work. Recognizing these circumstances as answers requires faith, patience, and discernment, as the significance may not be clear at first. In addition, God sometimes answers prayers through correction. A rebuke, a confrontation, or a challenge may not feel pleasant, but these moments can carry the guidance we are seeking. God's answers are not always comfortable because growth is rarely easy. Correction forces us to reevaluate our attitudes, actions, or priorities. It points us toward alignment with his will, even when the message comes through another person. If we ignore correction because it is delivered in a way we do not expect, we risk missing the very answer we prayed for. The natural elements in our environment can also be tools God uses to provide answers. Opportunities, timing, or seemingly coincidental events may all be orchestrated by God. A chance meeting, a job opportunity, or even an unexpected challenge may be the way he responds to our prayers. What we might dismiss as luck or coincidence can be divine orchestration. Recognizing this requires spiritual awareness, an openness to see God at work in ordinary life, and a willingness to step into the opportunities he presents. Another important aspect of God answering through people and circumstances is that it often requires our cooperation. Unlike a miraculous instant solution, these answers demand that we take steps in faith. God provides guidance through a mentor, a sign, or a series of events, but we must act on it. Our response becomes part of the answer itself. God's involvement does not remove our responsibility to engage, make decisions, or persevere. Understanding this helps us see that his answers are often collaborative. They are designed to develop our faith, wisdom, and character. Recognizing God's answers through people and circumstances also teaches us to value discernment. Not every word or event is a direct message from God. Spiritual discernment allows us to distinguish between what is merely coincidental and what is divinely orchestrated. It requires prayer, reflection, and sometimes confirmation from multiple sources. God wants us to actively participate in seeking his guidance rather than passively waiting for something dramatic to happen. This process of discernment develops spiritual maturity and a deeper sensitivity to his voice. Finally, understanding that God often answers through natural means shifts the way we approach prayer. We stop looking only for the extraordinary and start appreciating the ordinary as potential vehicles for divine intervention. This perspective helps us see God's hand in everyday life and encourages us to respond with faith and obedience. When we become aware that answers may come through people, circumstances, and challenges, we stop missing the subtle ways God works and begin to recognize his ongoing presence and activity in our lives. Through this, we learn that God's answers are no, confined to miraculous events or dramatic signs. They can be hidden in the words of a friend, the timing of an opportunity, or even the challenges that force us to grow. When we develop the ability to see God at work in these ways, we experience a richer, more practical faith, one that is aware, responsive, and aligned with his ongoing guidance. Recognizing God's answers through people and circumstances ultimately deepens our trust and teaches us that his wisdom surpasses our expectations and his ways are always purposeful. God's answers do not always come wrapped in what we would call yes. Sometimes he says no. Sometimes he says wait. And though these responses can feel disappointing, frustrating, or even confusing, they are as much a part of his communication as the moments when he grants what we ask. Many people struggle with the idea that God would ever deny a request or make them wait. They see a no or a delay as a lack of care or an indication that their prayers have been ignored. But in reality, every response from God, whether it is yes, no, or wait, is grounded in love, wisdom, and purpose. Understanding this perspective transforms the way we approach prayer and interpret life circumstances. No, from God is not a punishment. It is often protection. We may ask for something that seems good on the surface, but God sees the long-term consequences that we cannot. He knows the risks, the hidden pitfalls, and the ways certain blessings might distract us from the greater purpose he has for our lives. A door closed in response to a prayer may be God steering us away from a path that could lead to harm, compromise, or unnecessary hardship. It is easy to resist or resent a no when we are focused on immediate gratification, but God's no is always wiser than our yes. He acts out of knowledge we do not yet possess and out of a love that surpasses our understanding. Waiting is also an integral part of God's answers. When God tells us to wait, it is not a sign of neglect or indifference. Waiting is often about preparation, both of our hearts and of the circumstances around us. God may be cultivating patience, endurance, and character within us while aligning external conditions to ensure that his answer is both effective and sustainable. Waiting refines our faith because it shifts our focus from the outcome to the process. It teaches us to trust God not just for what he gives, but for who he is. In waiting, we learn that faith is measured not by the speed with which prayers are answered, but by the steadfastness of our trust while they remain unanswered. A no or a wait can also teach discernment. When we do not receive exactly what we want, we are compelled to examine our motives and desires. Are we seeking something out of selfish ambition, comfort, or pride, or are we seeking alignment with God's will? God's responses, particularly the negative or delayed ones, serve as mirrors for our hearts. They reveal whether we are truly pursuing Him or simply pursuing what we think will make us happy. The refusal or postponement forces us to reconsider, evaluate, and refine our wreck. Which in turn aligns our desires more closely with God's purposes. God's no is not the absence of care. It is often a deeper form of guidance. There are things we do not yet see or understand, and God's response may protect us from missing His bigger plan. Sometimes saying no is His way of redirecting us to something greater than what we could imagine. A missed opportunity or an unfulfilled desire may actually open space for a blessing or assignment that far surpasses the one we initially asked for. Recognizing that no is sometimes a yes in disguise requires faith and perspective. It challenges us to trust that God is always working, even when the immediate results are not visible. Even a delayed yes carries a similar lesson. Waiting periods help us grow spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. They teach us resilience and patience, two qualities that are essential for receiving, sustaining, and stewarding God's blessings. Without the wait, we might not develop the maturity or wisdom required to handle the very answer we seek. God's timing is perfect, and His responses, whether yes, no, or wait, are always calculated to produce the most lasting and beneficial outcome for our lives. When we begin to see that all answers from God, including no and wait, are purposeful, we can approach prayer with a different mindset. We stop seeing denial as rejection or delay as neglect. Instead, we start to view every response as a means of growth, protection, and alignment with God's ultimate plan. This perspective encourages patience, gratitude, and deeper faith. It also allows us to remain open to His guidance in unexpected ways, recognizing that His wisdom surpasses our understanding and that His love underpins every decision He makes regarding our lives. Learning to accept no and wait as valid answers requires humility. It requires acknowledging that our perspective is limited, that we cannot always see the full picture, and that God's knowledge extends beyond time and circumstance. By embracing these responses as part of His communication, we develop a more mature, resilient faith, one that trusts Him in uncertainty and rejoices in His guidance, even when it does not match our expectations. Over time, we realize that no and wait are not obstacles to our prayers, but essential components of God's perfect plan for shaping, directing, and blessing our lives. Spiritual sensitivity is essential for recognizing God's movement and understanding His answers. Many people pray faithfully, yet they fail to notice how God is responding because they are not attuned to His ways. Developing spiritual sensitivity means cultivating the ability to perceive God's guidance, presence, and intervention in both ordinary and extraordinary circumstances. It is about learning to discern His voice amidst the noise of life and being alert to the ways He works through people, events, and even our own circumstances. Without this awareness, we can miss the subtle but powerful ways God is answering our prayers and guiding our paths. One of the most important aspects of spiritual sensitivity is attentiveness. God often answers in ways that are not immediately obvious. A change in circumstances, a timely conversation, or an unexpected opportunity may carry His response. But if we are distracted, indifferent, or preoccupied, we may overlook it. Attentiveness requires a deliberate effort to notice the details around us, to listen closely to the impressions and promptings of the Spirit, and to remain present in each moment. It means refusing to assume that answers always come dramatically or immediately, and instead being open to the quiet ways God communicates. Spiritual sensitivity also involves discernment. Not every event or encounter is a direct message from God. Not every opportunity is aligned with His will. Developing discernment allows us to separate the ordinary from the divine, to understand which situations are orchestrated by God and which are merely coincidental. This discernment grows through prayer, reflection, and a deepening relationship with God. It requires humility, acknowledging that we do not have all the answers, and a willingness to seek His guidance before making decisions. Discernment ensures that we do not mistake our own desires or assumptions for God's direction. Prayer is a key component of cultivating spiritual sensitivity. Through regular, intentional communication with God, we become more attuned to His voice and more aware of His movements. Prayer is not just about asking for things. It is about listening, reflecting, and aligning our hearts with His purposes. As we spend time in prayer, we begin to recognize patterns, confirmations, and nudges that signal God's involvement. The more we practice this listening posture, the more naturally we can detect His answers in the flow of everyday life. Observation is another vital aspect of spiritual sensitivity. God often answers through circumstances and people, and being observant allows us to notice His hand at work. A friend offering timely advice, a door opening, or even a challenge presenting itself may be part of His response. If we are careless or distracted, we may fail to see these signs. Observation requires intentionality and mindfulness, a commitment to being present and aware, and the patience to reflect on events with spiritual perspective. Recognizing God's answers often involves connecting the dots after the fact, and careful observation makes that connection easier. Spiritual sensitivity also includes a willingness to act. Recognizing God's movement is not enough if we do not respond. Often His answers require our participation, but either it is taking a step of faith, offering forgiveness, or making a difficult decision. Sensitivity without action is incomplete. It becomes knowledge without application. Acting on God's guidance reinforces our awareness, builds our faith, and allows His answers to manifest more fully in our lives. The more we respond to His leading, the more attuned we become to His voice. Faith and patience go hand in hand with spiritual sensitivity. Sometimes God's answers are subtle, gradual, or delayed. We may not immediately understand what He is doing, and it takes trust to remain attentive without frustration or doubt. Spiritual sensitivity develops when we remain patient, watching for His movement even in silence, and trusting that His timing is perfect. This patience strengthens our relationship with Him and allows us to see His answers clearly when they unfold. Finally, cultivating spiritual sensitivity requires a lifestyle of surrender and humility. It involves submitting our own agendas, preconceptions, and expectations to God, and being willing to see His answers in ways that differ from what we anticipated. Humility allows us to accept His guidance with gratitude, even when it challenges our understanding or comfort. It opens our eyes to the broader picture of His plan and prepares our hearts to respond in alignment with His will. Through attentiveness, discernment, prayer, observation, action, patience, and humility, spiritual sensitivity grows. It enables us to recognize God's answers more fully, perceive His guidance in everyday life, and respond with faith. When we cultivate this awareness, we begin to see that God is constantly at work, moving in ways that may be subtle but are always purposeful. Developing spiritual sensitivity transforms how we experience prayer, decision-making, and life itself, allowing us to walk more closely with God and recognize His and at work in every situation. Recognizing God's answers often requires understanding that His timing and methods are not limited to what we expect. God rarely works according to our human schedules, and His answers are often designed to unfold in ways that develop our faith, strengthen our character, and align us with His greater purposes. This awareness that God's timing is intentional and precise helps us appreciate His answers even when they are delayed, gradual, or unexpected. Understanding His timing is a key aspect of spiritual maturity. because it shifts our focus from impatience and doubt to trust and perspective. One of the primary reasons God's answers may seem delayed is that He is preparing us for what we have asked for. Often we pray for something significant, yet we are not yet equipped to handle it. God's delay is not neglect, it is preparation. He uses the waiting period to cultivate patience, discipline, and wisdom. Through challenges, setbacks, or periods of uncertainty, He teaches lessons that cannot be learned in comfort or immediacy. If we were given what we asked for prematurely, we might squander the opportunity or fail to steward it properly. By waiting, God ensures that when the answer comes, we are ready to receive and utilize it for His glory. Another aspect of God's timing is that it often coincides with the readiness of circumstances beyond our control. He is orchestrating events, influencing people, and arranging situations to align perfectly with His plan. What appears to be a delay may actually be divine alignment. A door may remain closed until other factors are in place, such as the right relationships, resources, or timing, ensuring that the answer is fully effective when it arrives. This teaches us to trust that God is not passive, but actively working behind the scenes, even when we cannot see the full picture. God's answers: A, we also time to teach reliance on Him rather than on ourselves. When we pray and receive an immediate solution without dependence on God, we may grow complacent, self-reliant, or spiritually immature. By allowing a period of waiting, God draws us closer, requiring us to depend on Him for strength, guidance, and patience. This process deepens our faith and teaches us that He is the source of all provision, protection, and wisdom. The delay becomes a tool for spiritual growth, not a punishment or oversight. Additionally, God's timing is often tied to His greater purposes beyond our immediate desires. We may pray for something that seems urgent or necessary, but God's perspective is eternal. He sees the long-term consequences and the ultimate outcome in ways we cannot. What we perceive as a delay may be God arranging events for a larger plan that we do not yet understand. His timing ensures that the answer will have the maximum impact, not only in our lives, but also in the lives of others. Recognizing this requires faith that His wisdom is greater than our understanding. God also uses timing to cultivate gratitude and perspective. When answers are delayed, we learn to value them more when they arrive. Instant gratification does not always foster appreciation, but waiting allows us to recognize the effort, prayer, and divine orchestration behind the fulfillment. Delayed answers often lead to deeper joy, stronger faith, and a richer understanding of God's faithfulness. The waiting period is an essential part of the answer itself, teaching lessons that immediate fulfillment cannot provide. Furthermore, understanding God's timing helps us interpret His answers correctly. Many people miss God's response because they expect it to occur according to their own calendar. They pray, wait a certain period, and when nothing happens exactly as they anticipated, they assume silence, or denial. However, God's timeline operates according to His wisdom, not ours. By trusting His timing, we learn to recognize subtle confirmations, gradual progress, and divine orchestration in ways we might otherwise overlook. This perspective enables us to see His answers clearly when they unfold. God's timing also encourages perseverance and faithfulness. When we do not receive immediate answers, we are challenged to remain steadfast in prayer, obedience, and trust. This endurance strengthens our character and proves the sincerity of our faith. Waiting cultivates resilience, humility, and hope, which are essential for navigating life's uncertainties and for fully embracing the answers God provides. Each moment of faithful waiting becomes part of the preparation that makes the ultimate fulfillment more meaningful and transformative. Finally, recognizing God's timing requires surrender. We must release control, relinquish impatience, and trust that He knows the exact moment to act. This surrender is an act of faith, acknowledging that His wisdom, knowledge, and love surpass our understanding. By aligning ourselves with his timing, we allow God's plans to unfold perfectly, experiencing his guidance and provision fully. Waiting with trust and awareness enables us to see that every answer, every response, and every movement in our lives is part of a deliberate and loving divine plan. Through awareness of God's timing, we learn to interpret delays, setbacks, and opportunities as intentional components of his answers. We recognize that waiting is preparation, that circumstances are orchestrated for alignment, and that every moment is part of a greater purpose. Understanding and embracing his timing deepens our faith, cultivates patience, and sharpens our spiritual perception, allowing us to see his hand at work in every aspect of life and to respond faithfully when his answers finally arrive. Recognizing God's answers requires a lifestyle of humility and surrender, because true spiritual awareness depends on aligning our hearts with his will rather than insisting on our own understanding. Many times, we approach prayer with expectations shaped by our desires, preferences, or limited perspective. We think we know the best way, the right timing, and the ideal outcome. Yet God operates on an entirely different plane, with wisdom and foresight far beyond what we can grasp. If we cling to our own agenda, we risk missing his guidance, misunderstanding his answers, or dismissing his interventions as irrelevant. Cultivating humility allows us to see the ways God is working, even when it is not what we initially envisioned. Surrender is closely tied to humility because it involves actively choosing to release control and trust God's plan. It is more than passive acceptance. It is a conscious decision to align our thoughts, actions, and expectations with his purposes. Surrender requires admitting that our timing is not perfect, our knowledge is limited, and our solutions are often incomplete. In doing so, we create space for God to work freely in our lives. When we release our insistence on controlling the outcome, we open our hearts to receive his answers, which may come in forms, timing, or through channels we never anticipated. Humility in recognizing God. Answers also involves acknowledging that his ways are higher than ours. Human perspective is narrow, focused on the present, and often driven by emotion or desire. God, however, sees the bigger picture, including the long-term consequences and the spiritual growth that may result from a particular path. What appears as a denial, a delay, or even a challenge may actually be an answer designed to guide us toward a better outcome. Humility allows us to step back and trust that God's decisions are always informed by wisdom and love, even when they are difficult to understand in the moment. Surrender also strengthens our ability to respond to God's answers with obedience. Many people recognize God's intervention but hesitate to act because it requires sacrifice, change, or discomfort. Surrendering our preferences allows us to move forward with faith, even when the answer is inconvenient or requires effort. It is in our obedience that God's answers come to full fruition. Recognizing his guidance is not enough. We must participate actively, following where he leads. Without surrender, we may see the answer but remain stagnant, missing the full blessing and purpose God intends. A humble and surrendered heart is also more receptive to correction. Often, God's answers come in the form of guidance, redirection, or even gentle rebuke. If we are prideful or rigid, we are likely to resist, ignore, or rationalize what.
Loving you alone feels so beautiful, and yet it hurts the most. You became my quiet sunrise, the dream I never dared to say. Every smile you gave so freely took my breath a little away. I held this love like fragile glass, so precious, soft and true. But every beat inside my heart was only reaching out to you. Unspoken love is sweet and painful, like honey mixed with rain. A tender hope I so tightly, while it slowly breaks me. Loving you from just one side now leaves my soul in silent blue. 'Cause the deeper that I fall alone, the lonelier I do. I can't blame my heart for choosing someone it could never keep. So I smile through hidden heartache and love you quietly. Unspoken love is sweet and painful, like honey mixed with rain. A tender hope I hold so tightly, while it slowly breaks me. Loving you from just one side now leaves my soul in silent blue. 'Cause the deeper that I fall alone, the lonelier I do. Maybe loving you in silence is the closest I can stay, though it leaves behind a sorrow that may never fade away. Unspoken love is sweet and painful, like honey mixed with rain. A tender hope I hold so tightly, while it slowly breaks me. Loving you from just one side now leaves my soul in silent blue. 'Cause the deeper that I fall alone, the lonelier I do.